Good afternoon and welcome to the Full Scottish on Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Corri Wilson and our guests this week are Emma Cooper, who's the Chief Executive of Scottish Rural Action, and Daye Tucker. Welcome. So we're going to kick off today's programme. Obviously it's Remembering Sunday, and I was quite interested to find out that there was quite a number of poppies out there now, which I wasn't aware of. So obviously we have the red poppy, which is the symbol for those who have given up their lives in battle. But we have the white poppy that was introduced by the Cooperative Women's Guild in 1933. And the following year it was ratified by the Peace Pledge Union as a symbol of anti-war and remembering victims of all war. But we also have the purple poppy, which is founded by Animal Aid, and that is remembering the millions of animals killed in war, but obviously honouring the animals in service today. And we have the black poppy, which is associated the remembrance of Black and African Caribbean contribution to our war effort. Now the Royal British Legion are clear that the red poppy is not a sign of support for war or death. But sadly, I think over the last few weeks I have seen poppies being politicised and people being attacked for not wearing one and receiving abuse online. Do you think that's what's been happening with the poppies recently? Have you noticed anything?
Well, I think it's really sad if that happens, because what's the value of choosing to wear a poppy if you feel like you have to wear a poppy, because otherwise you're going to get abuse online. And abuse online more generally has been a real concern for anybody in the public eye in recent years, hasn't it? Particularly, I think, women or minority groups who've really suffered from some of the trolling that takes place.
Yeah. I think in terms of language as well, Daye, is important, because we have seen what they've called the Festival of Remembrance, and I'm not sure the word festival sits comfortably with the idea of remembrance.
Yes, it shouldn't be a festival, it should be a period of reflection, I would have thought. So there needs to be a more appropriate word.
I think reflection's a good word for it, isn't it, really? That taking that opportunity to just think about what's happened, you know, and why and where we are now, and the different colours of poppies. I'm sure some people probably think that it's perhaps a bit over the top, but I think for me, in a way, sometimes it's good to highlight the contribution that different people, different groups of people or even animals have made to the world that we have now and the world that we currently live in, which is a democracy, even if there are some challenges with that democracy recently.
Yes. And particularly to emphasise the diversity of those who contributed to preserving freedoms for us, because recently there's been too much focus on how much Britain contributed, as opposed to, you know, the millions and millions of lives that were lost from other countries. I think the greatest loss of life was in Russia, but you don't hear about that. And we need history, and to be reminded about history and the facts, and not have it as a propaganda, because that's the way it's heading at the moment. Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously, the motto is lest we forget, but actually, do you think we've learned anything from previous wars?
No, clearly not.
It doesn't feel like it at the moment, does it? No, it really doesn't. And I suppose you have to remember with war that the majority of the victims are not the people who've chosen to make those decisions, whichever side of the divide that they're falling on. Really, they're victims of big politics, of people who have made some decisions and told them things which aren't true. And you're quite right, it feels like we're seeing a lot of that in recent years.
I definitely don't think you need to wear a poppy to have your own thoughts about people that have been lost in any wars, and obviously, there'll be families and people out there who've been touched by wars. There'll be hardly anybody that's never had a family member at some point that will have been involved in that. And obviously we saw the very disrespectful Trump refusing to go to the World War I cemetery visit because it was raining.
Yeah, I think you need a better reason, don't you, than a bit of rain, really, to miss a ceremony like that.
Yes, I think it was perhaps a follow-on from his bad temper at the interview session with the press corps, where he really let himself down, and more than he has ever let himself down before. And possibly he felt he should keep his head down and out the way, because there might be even more protest about him if he stood up there with people who really cared.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe in a way it's more respectful for him to have not attended if his presence was going to actually cause upset and protest and detract from the reason for having the event in the first place. Not, of course, that he would ever say that that's why he wasn't going, which is just a sort of shame, isn't it? You know, let's all be a little bit more honest about things, and maybe we would make some more progress with politics.
Yes.
We'll go back to Trump in a wee while, so we're going to move on to Brexit, and obviously we've got a bit of an agricultural feel today. So there's a story in the Scottish Farmer, which there was a breakfast meeting in the House of Commons, and Michael Gove apparently was too busy to attend, so he sent George Eustace, who upset everybody by saying that he'd only had 20 minutes to give them of his time. They were saying that the article goes on to say that right-wing Brexiteer policies that they're pursuing are irrelevant to farmers in Scotland. Would you think that would be correct?
Pursuing right-wing policies?
The policies in terms of farming in Brexit?
Very much so, yes. And the way things are going, they're going to continue to put policies in place that might be suitable for the big-scale farmers, the intensive farmers, but they're certainly not going to help hill farmers, who make up the majority of farmers the majority of the land in Scotland is hill land, and the smaller farmers. And it's the smaller farmers who are going to provide food security, I think, in the future. It won't be the big intensive farmers, because we are needing to look at local systems of food production to cut down food miles.
Are you aware of who was invited to that meeting? Was it open to all lobbying groups, or?
No, I believe it was very much a closed meeting for farmers, probably mostly big farmers, who have contributed significantly to the Tory coffers over the years. So for us, it's quite disappointing, actually, because I think the views of your average people in rural Scotland are not the same as the views of big farmers in Scotland, and everybody's views should be considered, not just the people who have been supporting the Conservative Party with their wallets, rather than perhaps their votes over the years. Or the wind farm subsidy,
Certainly the article goes on to say that a lot of them were Tory voters, and that they'll no longer be supporting the Conservative Party for that. Do you think that will mean a shift in farmers' attitudes towards independence?
I think farmers' attitudes towards independence have already shifted. They were with the Scottish Government policies way back in 2007. The government at the time looked after the farmers, and Richard Lochhead, the minister at the time, bent over backwards to try and get the views of the farmers and try and implement policies that would support them. And as the years went on, and then suddenly we got to the IT system and it crashed, and he was turned on as if everything that he'd done was forgotten and ignored. And because of the IT system crash, which, let's face it, it affected a lot of them for a short period of time, but since then they have been getting their payments not just on time but slightly earlier than they're getting them down south from DEFRA. So I feel very angry, and I feel very angry that my own union, NFUS, has let down a lot of Scottish farmers. NFUS membership, I think, might be about 8,000 holdings, but there's something like 22,000 holdings in Scotland. So, and it is, let's face it, it's a democratically driven organisation, membership organisation from the bottom up. So if you've got the spare time to go to the meetings and you can rant and rave, your voice will be heard up the ladder, and these are the guys that are lobbying the ministers.
In terms of Scotland and Brexit, Emma, do you think that there has been mention of the fact that Scotland will suffer if we can't get Labour from the EU? Is that going to be a big rural problem?
Yeah, absolutely. And not just for agriculture, actually, which we do tend to focus on a little bit when we talk about rural. All sorts of industries will suffer from a loss of migrant workers and are already starting to struggle to have enough people to meet their needs as it currently is. The tourism industry, for example, is really big in rural Scotland. A lot of that work is seasonal. Mm-hmm. Therefore, it's better suited in many ways for people who are going to come and stay here for that season and then who leave at the end of that season. And let's not forget that a lot of people who come to Scotland as migrant workers, they do actually settle here and they have families and they start businesses of their own. And, it's a huge part of our economy, and that exchange of people also means an exchange of knowledge and skills and ideas. And how can that not make our country a better place to live?
Yes. Definitely. On a very personal level, it has affected my business and began to affect my sheep business last year, where I'm a Marks and Spencer's preferred farmer. So I've got my system in place where very high welfare standards, high quality meat, very efficient. We've invested in lots of technology, and despite all that, we have been hit by outside impacts of Brexit. And that impact is the loss of migrant workers in the abattoir. So now we're facing backlogs of lambs who are ready to go to the abattoir, and they're having to wait up to 3 weeks to get throughput. In 3 weeks, your lamb will go overweight. And then you get penalised because it's overweight. So it is impacting on my business, so it's impacting on lots and lots of other farmers who are perhaps, dare I say it, slightly less efficient than me. And it's scary.
What we really need here, I think, is a really clear commitment from the UK government that migrant workers will continue to be welcomed after Brexit, and as much clarity as possible about what that system will look like as soon as possible. So people are reassured that when they come here to work, we want them. They feel welcomed, but also that the system and processes for that are easy, both for the employers here in Scotland and for the people wanting to come to Scotland to work.
Yes. I mean, a great big sharp knife, cutting it off and saying, we'll do a pilot for 2,600 workers for the whole of the UK? Let's face it, what planet is that Conservative Party and its ministers sitting on? We've already seen Dominic Raab making a fool of himself. They're living in a bubble.
Yeah. You mentioned Dominic Raab, and obviously it was astounding this week that he just realised that we were an island. Now, from an agricultural point of view, we are an island, so food security is a big issue.
Yes.
Is that something that we really need to pay attention to?
We do. I think in Scotland we're a bit more food secure than they are in the rest of the UK, obviously because of numbers. And I think we're the only part of the UK that are net exporters. The rest of the UK are net importers. So despite all the noise that they make about, Scotland better not become independent and we won't buy your goods, well, where else are you going to go? You've got us right next door to you. Are you really going to go to New Zealand and South America to buy your meat and your other produce? There might be opportunities, but not with this present system of poorly devised democracy, in inverted commas.
Is food security something that Rural Action are thinking about?
It's something that concerns us, absolutely. The exchange of goods, whether it's food or any other goods or services, is of deep concern to rural Scotland. We do have a number of businesses located which work across international borders. That's made much easier by the relationship we currently have with the EU. And it's a threat to our economy, really, as we go forward, both in food and other services. We can see factories, I think it's the Michelin factory in Dundee this week, is talking about moving with the loss of a significant number of jobs from that area. And that's because of Brexit, or at least they're saying that's in the mix of the reasons why they're moving. And in Wales, Llanelli, I think, have seen a big factory there as well is moving because of Brexit. So food security, but also security of employment, security of, our businesses being able to bring here to work for us, and being able to work abroad and have those trade, import, export relationships. And all of that is at real risk, I think, at the moment. And that's definitely a concern for people in rural Scotland.
Daye, you mentioned high quality produce, and obviously another campaign that's been going is Keep Scotland the Brand, which has been trying to concentrate on the geographical indicators, which are the indicators that are put in place to protect our produce, and that can be things like salmon, whisky, and obviously lamb. Are you worried about that loss of protection?
Oh, totally. I have been for the last 2 or 3 years, because we have seen it. When you're a farmer and you're involved in all the different stakeholder groups in farming, you can see it coming over the horizon. And yes, we knew about it a long time ago. And fortunately, first I noticed was when I saw the Union Jack signs outside one of the government tents at the Highland Show. Now this would be about 3 years ago. And I clocked it then and thought there was something odd going on. And since then, it's expanded to Wales. This year, when the whole of their food tent at the Royal Welsh Show was nothing but Union Jacks over all the stalls. So you can imagine that was like a red rag to the Welsh dragon, and they have stood up and said enough is enough. And we have always said at the beginning of this campaign, this is not just about Scotland. This is about protecting the regional brands within all of the UK, including English brands like Wensleydale cheese or Cornish pasties, or, Bakewell tarts, it could be, Welsh lamb. We must preserve the identity of these locally produced foods, and we cannot and must not rely on the Union Jack, the British brand, because let's face it, the British brand abroad is toxic at present. So it is not a good marketing strategy. And again, it brings us back to the inability of ministers to understand the reality of real life and business.
And I think about the waste of all that time and effort spent making Scotland the brand, and how important that's been, to then just kind of throw it out because, well, why? Yeah, why throw that out?
Yeah. Well, you talked about getting produce from out with the UK, and obviously there's been lots of scary stories about chlorinated chicken and hormone-treated beef. Is that a real concern, that this is where we could end up?
It is, because with so many people having the difficulty of buying food and having to rely on food banks, they're going to go for the cheapest food that they can get. And that will be, our food may be more expensive, but it's a lot safer, it's a lot healthier. And studies have proven that if you lose the nutrients in your soils, then that transmits up to the produce, and the produce are going to be less nutritious. So we in this country have put a lot of time and effort into making sure that our nutrient budgets on the farm balance, and that should come out in the meat that we're producing or the vegetables that we're producing. That doesn't happen in America, or indeed in some of these other countries. They've taken the nutrients out of the soil. They've just gone hell for leather and raped their ground. And that's why they have such an unhealthy nation. And it's happening here as well, because if the food isn't nutritious, it comes on to us. And one of the things that happens when you're on a net nutritious diet is that you get heart disease, you get obesity, you get bad behaviour apparently. And there's a society in Dundee called the Macarison Society who discovered all this many, many years ago. And it's worth Googling them to find out what they're doing. And they certainly lobbied Richard Lochhead way, way back. And he was the first minister to talk about the nutrient cycle. And about halfway through his administration, he was given the job of looking after the waste in Scotland, and Zero Waste Scotland came under his remit as well, so that he was then able to link up the whole thing between food from your plate, application onto the waste, application onto fields, and then back onto the, it was really, really well thought out.
And you touched on there, obviously there's serious health implications if we're going to be eating stuff that we actually don't know where it's come from, and we don't know what's happened to it in the processing.
Exactly. Well, there was a case just recently where somebody found that was Tesco chicken, and it said British on it, but actually it came from the Philippines. Now, anybody who knows how they produce chicken in the Philippines wouldn't want to touch it with a barge pole. And a barge pole is probably what they use to get the chickens out of these cages that sit over the top of water to do their poos into the water, and no, thank you.
Yeah. Emma, is the danger that the politicians making the decisions about stuff have actually very little knowledge or understanding of rural issues?
That is our real concern, actually. So the more centralised decision making is, the further away the people making those decisions are from the reality of living in rural Scotland and the challenges that we face. Yeah. And we hear examples all the time of, politicians or civil servants, and they say things with actually the best intentions, but what they're saying is really naive, and it really shows a lack of understanding about what living in rural Scotland's really like. So for us, we really want to see UK and Scottish government commitments to strengthening the rural economy. But to do that, they really have to be listening and working with the people who are living in those communities. So post-Brexit, we have this huge EU funding structure. Part of it's agriculture, part of it's fishing, part of it is rural development, things like broadband, roads even. All of that, a lot of that structure and funding comes from the EU. So after Brexit, when the UK government is designing its shared prosperity fund, how is rural Scotland going to be involved in that decision making? Because that has a really, really serious impact on the future of rural communities in Scotland.
Yeah. And it's not just politicians. I think people from urban areas are sometimes disconnected from what's happening rurally and what kind of impacts they have. And I think one of your award projects is about the repairing some of the damage that's done to the pathways in rural communities, whereby people are just going in but not realising just what impact that they're making. Is there something that we can do to improve people's understanding?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a little bit about the countryside code there, and isn't there an understanding about closing gates and how to manage your dog, in the countryside, and we see a lot about that during the summer months. But there's also thinking about our tourism policy and where are we encouraging people to visit? And if we're encouraging large numbers of people to visit a small community, which we are doing in Scotland currently, then how are we then supporting that community to manage those visitor numbers? Yes. Thousands of visitors being encouraged to go somewhere, and yet the public toilets have been closed because the councils don't have the money to keep them open. So what do you expect the impact of that to be? It's never going to be good, is it?
Yeah. And in terms of again, that connection, I think, are we getting better about young people, children understanding where their food comes from? It wasn't that long ago that, a child was asked where you get eggs from, and they said the supermarket. Are we getting better with, and getting children to understand the connection?
My experience as a rural person is yes, but it's easier to do that in a rural way. We have RET, Royal Highland Education Trust, who are wonderful at going into schools and explaining to the children about food miles and where their food comes from. And also they go out they fund buses which will take the children out to the farms so that they get a farm visit, and the same thing happens. They see the animals, they see what they're fed on, and it's a really good experience. RET isn't the only one, although it is the main one that performs this function, but Game Conservancy do it, and various other rural organisations will do school visits. Schools they're quite rigid, and trying to fit this into the timetable is a lot easier in the primary school than it is in the secondary school. And I'd like to see more progress in the secondary schools, continuing on the education that was started in terms of where your food comes from. I might be wrong because I haven't been to a school for a long time, but definitely from when I first got involved in it way back in 2006, I've seen enormous progress.
Is that something that Rural Action have picked up on, or?
We definitely think that education has improved in that respect, and it can always do better.
Yes.
I think, again, it's about food production, understanding where that comes from, but it's also about understanding what our country is, what makes up Scotland. Most of it is rural, actually, and there are some incredible career opportunities in rural Scotland, whether that's in agriculture, fisheries, forestry, or in some of the lesser well-known industries. We have finance industry in Scotland, we have a lot of creative industry in Scotland. Actually, there's some massive opportunities there, and given the right infrastructure and the right support, we as rural communities would absolutely make the best of that. So I think that link of a lot of businesses in rural Scotland say that they are struggling to find the right kind of employees for their business as well.
Yes.
So there's that ongoing disconnect, isn't there, between what businesses need in a locality and what education is providing.
Yes.
And anything we can do to bring that a bit closer and encourage young people to stay in rural areas, for example, improving the educational opportunities in rural areas would be very beneficial in that respect. Improving transport would be very beneficial. That's always going to be a good thing. And if you think about our economy and where the greatest untapped potential is, surely it's rural Scotland. Have these amazing natural resources. We don't have great infrastructure. If we did, imagine what more we could do.
Absolutely. Yes.
You talk about young people. Would it be fair to say that in recent years there has been an issue around farming and young people not going into farming, like following the family footsteps and whatever? Has that been a tension?
Very much so, because over the years, mechanisation and being encouraged to use technology, and so there's less and less people working on farms. Family farms have reduced to the extent that they can only support the main farmer. They can't even support the farmer's son very often in these businesses. And even if they did grow up the scale, it would be a struggle. But it's so exciting for me to see, when I look back to 2006, as a teacher at Balfron High School, where we started the Rural Skills course, which was, we recognised at the school that a whole lot of our children were just slipping through the gaps, because it was a very academic school by then. It's a very popular place to live, so lots of people were drifting out from Glasgow and having houses built around the area of the school catchment, and the farmers' children had nothing to provide for them. So we set up Strathendrick Partnership in Rural Education, and we were given about a pilot of, I don't know, maybe 20 children. And those kids went through first, second and third year, and they got their Intermediate 1 certificate. And nearly all of them are employed in the rural areas nowadays. Not all of them were farmers' children. Some of them were. A lot of them struggled at school, but we got them through, and I still keep in touch with all of them, and I'm so proud of all of them. Now, that project, which started way back then, has grown, and it was taken up by Scottish Land and Estates. Mike Russell asked them to develop a rural skills modern apprenticeship, and Scott Petrie, who was my regional manager of Central Region at the time, took it on board, and he had the skills to develop that project into like a ladder where you could access different levels of training, and you could start and come out and go in if you wanted, and you could go right up to the very top and to a very academic degree if you wanted. And that has been a boon, and I was so thrilled maybe 2-3 years ago to launch it, or Fergus Ewing launched it, and I was able to give a talk at it. And it was the Rural Skills Modern Apprenticeship, and we now have an Agricultural Modern Apprenticeship. And guess what? I have got an Agricultural Modern Apprentice on my farm, so I can do that a little bit. And he is bringing skills that I don't have, the IT skills that he's got, because I've invested in the technology, and I can track the growth of lambs and whether they're not growing, and then give them appropriate worming or not. And he can do all that, whereas my brain just gets completely beflummoxed by it, and he can calm me down and say, no, this is what you do. So I feel the investment of time that I put in way back then, I'm beginning to get the benefit of it now, and other farmers are as well. There's about 4 agricultural apprentices in my immediate area.
Which will obviously help safeguard farming for the future.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. You touched, I think, Emma, on fishing, and the national paper yesterday ran a story that the Tories are prepared to sell out fishermen for a deal. Is that a surprise, Daye?
No. No.
And even the Tory MPs are saying it's a red line and they're not happy. Is there similarities here to the agricultural sector about, decisions getting made again with little understanding of the impact?
Yeah, I'm sure that's the case. Yeah, I mean, we tend not to really speak for agriculture, but across rural Scotland, when we're looking at all of the different policy and funding streams that have an impact on rural Scotland, we just see them being a little bit thrown out the window, really. And underlying all of this, of course, is the sense that people who voted for Brexit are not getting what they wanted. People who didn't vote for Brexit are not getting what they wanted. Nobody really seems to be winning currently.
No. And Daye, there was a story in the Daily Record about what they called the Cod Fathers, the 5 families in the UK that seem to have the biggest share of the fishing rights. Again, is that similar to agriculture in terms of the smaller fishing families and fishing fleets and the smaller farming? We need to protect those smaller activities or communities.
Smaller, more sustainable ones.
Yeah.
I confess I don't know a huge amount about it, but I do have a Twitter friend called Brian Buchan who has the same name as one of these farm families. And Brian is obviously sailing a different route to myself, but we keep talking to each other, which is good. And perhaps he learns a little bit about farming and I learn a little bit about his fishing. But yes, these big boats, whether they've got, how many families are they supporting? Perhaps it's a bit like some of the estates where you've got one landowner, but on that estate there might be 3, 4, 5 even tenant farmers. And the whole thing, if things are going well, it works well. If things aren't going well, it's a disaster. And I'm quite sure it's very similar on these boats. Yeah.
Sticking with farming, obviously there was Sky News reporting that a recent Oxford University research about taxing red meat. Were you aware of that research, Daye?
Yes, I've had a quick look at it. I've become awfully sceptical, and I would always want to know who funded that research. Was there an agenda there? And is there an opportunity? Who was involved in that research? So likes of yourself and other agricultural organisations, were they part of that research? Did they, feed into it? So I think that's quite important. Yes.
Before you come to any final decision.
Or was it desk-based research?
And is it maybe not that it's actually processed meat that's more of a concern than red meat?
Oh, I'd agree with that. There's no doubt. The minute you start to do things with meat, the minerals and the good stuff in it deteriorates. So the more it's fiddled about with, it'll still have food value, but it won't be as good as fresh, uncontaminated by human hand food. Cooked by human hand, if you know what I mean. In individual households.
And obviously we had the recent case of BSE in Scotland. Do you think does that send the rural community into a bit of a spin? Because I think you get a lot of negativity in the press around that misreporting and
for sure. There have been really traumatic experiences in the farming community, and that has a wider impact on the wider rural community as well in the past, in terms of foot and mouth disease, for example, and the BSE cases. It is a worry, isn't it? But I think what it really showed for us is that the systems which are now in place are so much more effective. That did not get into the food chain. It was detected at a very early stage. The right measures have been taken very quickly to manage the situation very effectively, and we should have no ongoing concern about that.
Absolutely. And I think we have to also congratulate NFUS, who handled it very promptly and very efficiently and calmed everybody down and put the facts before the public, before the press could spin it out of orbit. So that really was very welcome to the farming community, that they were not on the back foot. They really got in there, and they should be congratulated on that.
So linked to agriculture, we've got a story in Scotland on Sunday today where they have told us that Trump at Turnberry is about to build, or he's applying for planning permission to build 87 houses on prime agricultural land. Is that a concern, that that agricultural land is being eroded?
Yes and no for us. Affordable housing in rural Scotland is a really serious issue. We absolutely need to see more affordable rural homes, and there are some great initiatives happening in the country to make that happen. So more homes, yes, brilliant, great. In the right places,
yes,
and affordable. That's what we really need to see, is those homes in the right place and built in an affordable way, so that actually it's people who have their roots in the community, that are going to work in the community, live in the community, that are able to afford those homes. And what we're not producing is lots of second homes or lots of holiday homes for people who are maybe going to use the golf course, because I understand it's not been that successful really. So I don't know.
In terms of that, Daye, obviously, people, you are altering the landscape of small rural communities by putting in 87 big posh villas in what is actually a very quaint wee part of the country.
Yes.
Is that a concern?
It certainly is a concern for all the reasons that have just been expounded. I would want to know what the quality of that land was. And I would like to see Scottish Government, supposing, I don't know, it might be grade 2, that I think that's Ayrshire potato growing ground, is it not? Maybe it's not grade 2, but if it was grade 2 or even grade 3-1, then perhaps we ought to be thinking about preserving that land and not allowing building on it. And I don't know that there's any legal mechanism to stop that at the moment. But we've only got about 8% of our land that is of that high quality for growing. So
I think that's maybe where the tension comes in terms of planning.
Yes.
Because a planning application will be deemed on planning issues, which might not necessarily
go wider.
And this is the problem with a lot of our policy and decision making, isn't it? Is that we don't work with the community and work out the best use for that land, collectively.
Yes.
What we do is we have a planning system and land ownership, and that those two things can mean that we're not necessarily getting what we need for our communities. And I do agree that agricultural land is very important, and if this is really high quality agricultural land, maybe it should be used differently. But I think we need to be a little bit careful when we talk about preserving rural Scotland. It isn't something which is static. It shouldn't stay the same forever. Actually, it should evolve. There should be new infrastructure, there should be new housing, there should be new schools. Nobody wants to see rural Scotland, that's it stays as it is. So there's an inbuilt tension there.
There is, but there are very good models which would counter that. One of which is, and because I'm in the Stirling area and I've experienced it, is the community planning partnerships. Now, when that law was brought in about community planning and trying to get more effective planning, it was left to the individual local authorities. It was left wide enough so that they could devise their own model, which actually meant that some of them didn't bother trying very hard. Stirling did. And they looked at a model over in Canada, which then they and the National Park and various other bodies came together to implement. And the community planning in Stirling, I think, has been incredibly successful because they really do consult with their communities. They split the county into, I think it's 4, maybe 5 areas. And in my area, which is called the Rural Southwest, there are 12 villages, 12 communities, and we each have a place at the next layer up. So quarterly we all come together and we have meetings, and the council come and talk to us about what would you like, and we actually feed into the policy decisions that the council makes. So it can work. It's very slow, but it can work. And we've got farmers there, I'll give you a wee example. I always use this one. The little bus that goes from the car park down beside Castle Park, what's it called? The pay bus, the one that you get on and you only pay a wee drop. And it never took us to the hospital. It just went so far and stopped. So we said to them, look, we'd like this bus to go to the hospital, please. Oh, we can't do that. There's no turning space. Could you make a turning space? They did. So that's one small example of communities working with the local authority through community planning. But there's lots of other wee examples. I mean, we've been banging on for ages about the road outside my farm because the big tractors were making a heck of a mess down the side. Through the best way to do it, go to your community council. The community council gets in touch with the council. It gets done. In my area, it does get done, so it can work if you use the correct routes.
Yeah. Sticking with Trump, obviously we had the midterm elections and we saw the Democrats regain control, but what we also saw was more women being elected in America, which obviously is great, and obviously there was more people from diverse backgrounds too. In terms of women's voices, is that something rurally we need to get better at?
Definitely, yes. I mean, we have the largest gender pay gap in rural Scotland, so there's some clear issues there. And actually, at the Rural Parliament next week, we're going to be looking at that rural gender pay gap specifically. There's been some great initiatives, though. There's the Women in Agriculture initiative, which Daye will know far more about than I will. And there have been some good initiatives to sort of skill women up in terms of looking at political positions as well, and that's been really important.
And we saw some videos this week where Trump was, for want of a better word, bullying and picking on journalists who were doing their job, trying to be the check and balance. Is this the kind of behaviour we expect from the leader of the free world?
From this particular leader, we've come to expect it, rather sadly.
Yeah, that's true. Moving on, I think you tweeted about this earlier, was the Iceland advert, which has been banned because apparently it was made for Greenpeace, and they have said because broadcasting regulations say that it's banned because it was used to a political end. Surely that was more of an environmental campaign.
Well, I don't know whether, yes, it probably is an environmental campaign, but let's face it, we slam supermarkets for their bad environmental footprint. What have Iceland done? They've sorted out packaging, they've put this, you can see the path they're beginning to travel. Why is our government coming in and stopping them from this progress? The fact that it was the MOD who complained because they're selling equipment to Malaysia, and who else? Some other government department complained as well. And you think to yourself, hang on a minute, we've got conflicting things going on here. Surely the UK realises it has a responsibility in terms of the environmental impact. They've already shown themselves to be very poor in that direction by importing so much food with a very poor environmental footprint and wanting to continue to do that rather than supporting their own farmers whose footprint is much lower and whose animal welfare is much higher.
Emma, is this a case of sort of Big Brother not understanding again the impact of our food chain and the global impact as well? If animals are dying just so that we can eat something and it's going to have an environmental impact, then I think we need to be a bit more aware.
I think it's all about awareness raising, isn't it? And people being a little bit aware of what they're buying and what they're eating. I think the Iceland advert, to me, it's an environmental campaign, and I don't really quite understand why it would be banned. But I suppose with palm oil, as with anything, it's about us having a balanced view. I'm not sure actually that banning something entirely is necessarily the right way either. That industry will support some people in some countries if it's managed sustainably. And the same thing, when we have a fad for avocados, suddenly it has a massive environmental impact. We have a fad for wild salmon, that would have a problem, that would cause a problem too. So really it's about being aware and trying to find that balance in what we're buying and as Daye says, buying locally, whenever we can, and just being aware of the ethical chain that goes into the things that we consume.
Yeah. Moving on, we saw the release of the outlawking on Friday, and I think you were tweeting about it as well, Daye. Now, what seems to have happened on social media is that it's highlighted a gap in Scottish history knowledge.
Yes.
Is that what you've been seeing? Very
much so. And even following some of the threads where people were saying that they'd watched it and it was, it was terrific, or maybe it wasn't quite correct. But underneath those threads, everybody was putting a wee contribution and adding another jigsaw piece to the puzzle that is our past history. And it was really interesting the way that, and I would see something on one of the tweets and then go off and Google it and find out a bit more. And for instance, I came across a YouTube video of a French orchestra playing Scots Wha Hae. And realised, and then looking at and it was in French, and I managed to translate underneath the comments, and it went on about the Old Alliance and about Joan of Arc, and that Scots Wha Hae was played as they came in to support Joan of Arc fighting to free Orleans. And I just thought, it just goes on and on. There is a huge gap.
Yeah, I think for me it was interesting, obviously from my neck of the woods in Ayrshire, lots of people were tweeting about Loudon Hill and not knowing about it. So I suspect Loudon Hill is probably going to get an influx of visitors over the next few weeks and months. Have you managed to see the film or anything, Emma? No?
I haven't managed to see it, no. I do think film and television is a great way of educating people about our history, isn't it? I grew up in England. Scottish history, it's not discussed. We learned a lot about the Tudors. And I like Philippa Gregory novels, so I know a lot about the Tudors, but beyond that, actually, it's pretty limited, and that seems a real shame.
Well, to be honest, there was not a lot of Scottish history taught when I was at school either, but hopefully that'll change going forward, because I think we do need to be mindful of our culture and our heritage and the impact on that. Now, this week, I think Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we see the Scottish Rural Parliament in Stranraer.
Absolutely.
So what are you kind of expecting from that, Emma?
So the Scottish Rural Parliament brings together nearly 400 people this year from all across rural Scotland, and we try to coalesce views. So we bring together all those different views and we express them in a way which we have found to be impactful, and it has more of an impact than if we're all sort of saying the same things but in a more disparate way. And for rural Scotland, we're so geographically diverse, actually it's a really good opportunity to bring people together. So on our agenda this year is a lot about Brexit, obviously, because it's going to have a huge impact on our rural communities. So prior to the Rural Parliament this year, we've held events all across rural Scotland, talking to people in their communities and asking them what the things are that they're really concerned about and what needs to change in order to ensure that rural Scotland can thrive in the future. So we have a draft position statement from that, and the Rural Parliament, one of the primary things that we'll be doing is debating that and shaping it up a little bit further till we hand it over to Michael Russell at the end of the event, who is coming to hear our views on Brexit in particular and post-Brexit rural policy. So that'll be a big focus of the event. And then we have a number of other work streams, looking at the Local Democracy Bill coming up next year, for example, the National Transport Strategy, thinking about housing, which we've already talked about, rural homelessness and how hidden that can sometimes be in rural areas, access to services. We've had the Royal Bank branch closures this year, RBS, and the understandable upset that people have felt over that, and we're seeing more and more of it. So really the whole event is about how do we ensure that rural communities have the best possible future, that they're sustainable and that they thrive.
And is the idea about having that parliament about bringing the people that it impacts on closer to the decision makers, having somebody there to listen to the contrast from Grove not turning up to the House of Commons Brexit in the brain, I think, is the idea about the decision makers can hear firsthand what it means for them.
Absolutely. Maybe it was a Brexit breakfast.
Maybe it's Maybe.
Yes, it is, very much so. So it's a pretty unique opportunity for people in rural Scotland, actually, because we have people from all tiers of government there, UK and Scottish government, and they're there in that listening capacity. You can ask them questions, they'll be at the meals, and people from all sorts of other agencies that make decisions which affect our country and rural communities as well. So it's a really good opportunity to do that. It's also a really, sometimes we need to celebrate what we have too, and we hope that there's a sense of celebration about the event. We hope people have a good time. We've got some inspiring award winners this year, some fantastic films that are being shown. We can talk about some amazing work that's happening all over rural Scotland. And, that's very inspiring, but it's also a chance to meet the person who solved the problem that you have in their community or has made some steps towards that, and start to kind of come up with new ideas and new approaches to things, and really move discussions and debate forward. We don't want to focus on having the discussions on the same thing again. What we want to do is find out what the solutions are and take steps forward. So that's really what the Rural Parliament is all about. And unlike the name Parliament, it's not, no one's elected to attend it. Anybody is welcome to attend. Yeah.
And I saw that you were holding a workshop that's going to shape the response to the local democracy bill in 2019. What are you hoping to get out of that?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got two actually in parallel. One is the government's consultation, and you can hold a workshop that will feed directly into their consultation on the local democracy bill. So we're giving people the opportunity to take part in that. And then we have another workshop which is radically rethinking rural democracy, which is a bit more thinking out of the box, trying to not be iterative about how we do democracy in our country, and trying to think a bit more creatively about what the systems and processes and structures are that we could have in place that could work better for us.
Well, I think we'll be looking for more information on that as it happens this week. That's all we've got time for, and somebody's trying to catch my eye here. I'm not witty, but anyway. But I'd like to thank Emma and Daye, for attending. I hope the viewers today enjoyed the new studio layouts that we have. For more information about Broadcasting Scotland and our programmes, you can visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot. And while you're there, you can also donate whatever you can to our crowdfunder. We're still trying to raise £30,000, and we're 2 weeks away from the end of that crowdfunder. We will obviously thank anybody who's donated so far. Look out for Scotland at 7 through the week on Broadcasting Scotland, and the Full Scottish will be back again next Sunday at noon. Thank you for watching, and have a good Sunday.